For early access plus exclusive content, facilitated discussions, live one-on-one Q&As, and more, become a patron at patreon.com/BrucePointset. What's up, everyone? It's Bruce. I'm here today with the Reverend Tara Wilkins of Bridgeport, UCC. How are you doing today, Tara?
I'm doing pretty well, Bruce. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming on. Yeah, I wanted to bring you on just to talk about, well, a couple of things, but first, I think a very timely program and partnership you're doing with Beacon Village in terms of serving unhoused people in Portland. And right now we're obviously in the midst of a major housing crisis that could very well get much worse. Earlier this week, Community Alliance of Tenants actually did a press conference where they were pushing for a special session in the Oregon legislature to extend the eviction moratorium. And I did an interview with their communications manager about that earlier this week. But the gist of it is basically, while we're already in a major housing crisis, and there's I don't have the number with me as far as how many people are unhoused right now, but that could get exponentially worse. So it's very important when we talk about programs, because a lot of the conversation right now is around a very, I think, just frankly, callous approach to the houseless population, and this push for sweeps, this stigmatizing of people, this dehumanizing of people. So one of the things I'm hoping to do is really highlight some of the programs that are, just taking a different approach, actually trying to, serve people, treat people with, dignity. And yeah, that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk with you, Reverend Wilkins, about just, you have a partnership with Beacon Village and you have a program going on. Can you just talk about what that is for the people?
Sure. And just to piggyback on your introduction, there's a lot of conversation about the houseless, but there's very little conversation about the housing crisis that we're in. And so you're spot on to say that people are dehumanized for the condition of the scarcity of housing that they have. And we have to get bold enough and brave enough to peel back the blue tarps and confront the suffering that is happening on the streets. I don't have the exact statistics, but it's somewhere around 4,200 people in Portland city limits that are experiencing houselessness at this time. And so that number might increase, which will further bring us the challenges. Our approach is really one that we sort of had to come to in the same way that our church voted to become open and affirming because they felt that LGBTQ people were being discriminated against. They wanted to call a lesbian pastor and couldn't. And so they broke away from the tradition that they were in and formed a new church. When people were coming up from South America and Central America in droves for experiencing genocide and violence in their own country, our church became a new sanctuary church, or what we now would call immigrant welcoming, because to respond to that need. When after the crisis with Breonna Taylor and Eric Gardner and Trayvon Martin and so many Black and brown people being murdered by the police, we voted to become anti-racist and are really delving deeply into what does that mean for us and how do we confront our own internalized racism. And then we have had this partnership with the people at Beacon, serving in another location, meals once a week. It started once a month, and then we started to actually cook and take to the park to be distributed a meal once a week. We're still involved in that. And so when our previous partner moved out of our church and I approached Beacon and suggested that they bring the cooking inside and run a day center out of our fellowship hall. And they said to me, well, we would do that, but our people aren't going to want to come up from where they're currently staying and leave their belongings. What do you think about having tiny houses on your property? And my first reaction was one of a little bit of trepidation about, well, how would we work that out with the neighbors and what would that mean for us? But I prayed about it and I hung in there with that idea. And the city, just the week before, had passed the shelter to housing continuum, which allows faith communities to house up to 20 people on their property in the way that we are. And I just sat with that and I said, no, so much of the ministry of Jesus was about restoration to community, that this is about so much more than just providing people with a safe place to be every night. It's also about having being restored to community. So the village, Beacon Village, is 10 micro homes. There'll be 10 residents on the northwest corner of our property in an enclosed community. So they'll be safe in there. A couple of them have pets that can be in the property. And as part of that village, they'll have access to services, a place for showers and laundry, a locking house that they can be in and keep their stuff safe. But it's about more than that. It's about being in community. Our church ladies are quilters. Some of them are quilters, and they are currently making 10 quilts for each of the new residents to have in their own house. 10 people is a drop in the bucket for the crisis that we are experiencing. But we feel like if our church of 60 members can find a way to do this, so can other faith communities. And it's a good start to not only provide housing, but to provide community.
Mm. And you brought up the issue of the neighbors. So what has been the response of the surrounding community?
Well, initially, a couple of the neighbors saw the measuring of the parking lot happening. We had just voted to do this as a congregation. As you know, the UCC are Congregationalists, and the decision to do this is not within my power alone. So we had to go through a process as a congregation to decide that this is where we felt that God was calling us to extend that welcome next. And they were just measuring the parking lot. We were still developing what the plan was to talk to the neighbors and things. And two people saw that happening and they called me and they were upset. And I said, well, why don't you just come to the church and we'll sit down and talk about it, masked, because we weren't really gathering in person at that point, but to just have a conversation, because I didn't have a presentation plan, but I also didn't want their worst fears to run away with them. I wanted to provide them some reassurance and ultimately maybe even to get them excited about what we were doing. Well, 27 people showed up. So, and we really have, I would say, two groups of people in the neighbors. There is an organized group in the Montevilla neighborhood that are anti-homeless. And they have been strong lobbyists and have had demonstrations. It's been documented that they've been violent and verbally violent and physically violent to some of the houseless, ripping up tents, splashing them in the face with water, not to mention all the derogatory things. Wow. This is an organized group. And they showed up for our community meeting. We had 2 community meetings. And so their vitriolic approach to what it means to be houseless was loud and strong. And the challenge of that is, of course, then the people that have real concerns that maybe are actually adjacent neighbors or something weren't getting to have that kind of conversation. But we also got a tremendous amount of support for, I'm so glad this is happening here. Because in the Montevilla neighborhood, not unlike other neighborhoods in Portland, there are a lot of people that are sleeping in cars, that are tenting, that are just trying to find something to eat and a warm place to be, a safe place to be. And so they were really, we have a bunch of neighbors that are really supportive and want to be involved in some way in, sort of our radical approach.
Yeah, and it's great to hear, and just feel like it highlights this point of there's going to be these elements out there that are going to push back, and you know in some very unfortunate ways, but these things can be overcome when community shows up and community is supportive. It's kind of what the takeaway I'm taking from this anyway.
For sure. And the government has been really ineffective because at addressing this. And I know there's a lot of rhetoric happening now about how this is a priority. And the shelter to housing continuum is a good first step. But even within that process, there's so much work to do, because while they have streamlined the suspending of zoning laws and things, there still are codes that we have to follow, which is good, electrical codes and things like that. But even in that process, there was hesitancy around certain elements of our plan because the city was raising questions about whether or not they're going to be sued. And the thing is that we are always going to have that element in society that looks down on the poor, that wants to criminalize the poor, that just doesn't want to deal with people experiencing scarcity. And we cannot develop policy and our response based on those extremist views. That for me and for our church, we had to start with their humanity, that people feeling experiencing scarcity of housing or food need to first be seen in our religious language as a child of God, or we could say as a citizen of the city, because they're community members as well. It's not like the only people that are citizens and community members are ones that own a home, right? Our renters are community members, and people that sleep in their cars are community members. They're already there. There was some concern that we were going to bring busloads of people from other places. And it's like, our goal is to serve the people that are in our community, right, who are already tenting 2 blocks down or sleeping in a doorway, who need that kind of services, where they need a hot meal, where they need a place to shower and do laundry, where they need a community, somebody that'll look them in the eye and say, hey man, how you doing today? That care about how somebody feels about them, and hopefully help them take that next step. But the path from being on the street to housing is not a direct one. And there's going to be a lot of work that we have to do systemically besides provide affordable housing to help folks really not be in the situation that they're
Yeah, and another thing you kind of covered on in that point, just as far as just taking care of people in the community, because I think a common misconception I tend to hear is just that this idea that if the church is doing something or a church is doing something, it's just about essentially like missionary work, like it's trying to convert people as opposed to just taking care of people. And I want to get to that in another discussion that we've had a lot offline as far as about this idea of the nuns, if you will, but I'll tease that for another video. But yeah, Tara, thank you again for coming on to just talk about this program, and hopefully just inspire more, now that you mentioned that it is we've passed laws to literally for faith organizations to do this work. So the hope is that more take advantage of that and the platform and the space to meet the needs in this crisis. So yeah, thank you again.
Yeah, you're welcome. We hope to change the conversation on houselessness and to inspire and really advocate that if our community can do it, so can you.
Thank you for watching. Please like and share and subscribe so you can stay up to date on all of the latest videos. Thank you.